Hi everyone, welcome back to Coffee, Books, and Rain. I'm Rachel with my coffee, with my books and my reviews, and no rain today, but hopefully tomorrow. Supposedly it is a fairly high percentage of rain. So let us dive into the first book of the moment, which is going to be Hazelthorn by C.G. Drews. And I picked this up because it did say it was perfect for fans of Andrew Joseph White. And that particular author has this really fantastic, gritty way of writing that feels raw and exposed and just, just captivating, eerie, kind of makes your skin crawl a little bit, but in all the best ways that you kind of want a book to do that to you, if that's the type that you're looking for. But it also has a little bit of a queer theme. It has a little bit of, gosh, it's hard. Like, Andrew Joseph White is someone who he always has these really poignant themes about, like, kind of social commentary, but done in such a brilliant way. I'm not certain I saw that particularly in this, but perhaps. But let's dive into the summary, and I'm going to try not to give too many spoilers, but I may end up accidentally giving spoilers because I have some thoughts on this book. Evander has lived like a ghost in the forgotten corners of Hazelthorn Estate ever since he was taken in by a reclusive billionaire guardian, Byron Lennox Hall, when he was a kid. For his safety, Evander has been given 3 ironclad rules to follow. He can never leave the estate, he can never go into the gardens, and most importantly, he can never be left alone with Byron's charming, underachieving grandson Laurie. The last rule has been in place ever since Laurie tried to kill Evander 7 years ago, and yet somehow Evander is still obsessed with him. When Byron suddenly dies, Evander inherits Hazelthorn's immense gothic mansion and acres of sprawling grounds, along with the entirety of the Lennox Hall family's wealth. But Evander's sure his guardian was murdered, and Laurie may be the only one who can help him find the killer before they come for Evander next. Perhaps even more concerning is how the overgrown garden is refusing to stay behind its walls, slipping its vines and spores deeper into the house with each passing day. As the family's dark secrets unravel along the growing horror of their terribly alive, bloodthirsty garden, Evander needs to find out what he's really inheriting before the garden demands to be fed once more. Sorry, I am in the need for coffee at the moment. So it is definitely horror. There is absolutely body horror in this. So just be aware that if that kind of makes you feel uneasy, that is part of, like, I guess, I don't want to say the allure, but that body horror aspect gives it this certain vibe that I find is, like, kind of growing on me. I know, in a kind of a funny way, since this one's about plants, right? But there was one recently about, like, spores in the Pacific Coast region. Yeah, where it was, like, I don't know, like Washington or Oregon or somewhere up there. It was like some sort of spore kind of spreading and growing and causing zombie-like things. That had a lot of body horror in it as well as Andrew Joseph White's books tends to have quite a bit of body horror. But it definitely has a gothic vibe. The house itself is not a character per se, but the garden certainly is. And the garden is supposedly locked behind this door, but it is starting to spread and get through the cracks. I don't know if you guys have ever been told or know that, like, vines are not supposed to grow on a house. Like, I know it looks super pretty, but, like, English ivy shouldn't grow on a house because it can get into the cracks of whatever it is growing on and can start to pull it apart. So I know that is kind of frowned upon by at least people and architects who want their house to stay standing for long periods of time. No matter how pretty it is, supposedly that's a terrible thing to happen. It is about 368 pages, so it is just a little bit lengthy. And I want to say the audiobook was somewhere between 12 and a half to 13 hours. I did speed it up, so I think it would have been a very somber, dark tone. It still had that, but because I speed it up, it feels like it goes a little faster, and it feels like things get done a little bit more quickly rather than at like a one speed, like at regular speed. So Evander, he is trapped in this house, and that was something that was so incredibly confusing for me for the very from the very beginning of why is this kid who, I don't know, seems to have something wrong with him, why is he trapped in this house? It was very much like, there are words I want to say, but I feel like saying those words will actually be a spoiler. But he belongs to this house in the ways that I can kind of inflect upon it. And so he doesn't have to go to school. He doesn't really have to do much. And this poor kid, his memory seems to constantly be going in and out. He can't remember from one day to the next what he's been doing, how he's been acting. And he constantly, throughout this book, feels like he's going crazy, or he's got some sense of paranoia or something like that, like throughout this entire book. And he's also acts a lot like a victim, which, I mean, I get it, because he's almost like a prisoner in this house, and yet he doesn't really have this really big urge to leave or, go to the boarding school like Laurie goes to, or anything like that. So Lord Byron comes and visits him like infrequently, but also Lord Byron kind of tells him, he's like, oh, I'll come see you when I'm not on business trips. And so he'll go days just kind of wandering like a ghost through the halls of this house. And so I just found it both fascinating and very confusing, like what is going on? Because I knew from the very beginning of this book that there was something different about Evander. I couldn't figure out what it was for the longest time, but almost from the very beginning, I had an inkling. Now, that's why this book review is going to be so hard for me, is because that inkling spirals into how this book plays out. But I'm trying to avoid too many spoilers because I did think this book was pretty darn cool and creepy. Now, it released October 28th of 2025. I know I'm about a week-ish late. But again, I was moving, and that week I was absolutely swamped with so many things going on. So I am trying to catch up from that particular week, because I knew that there were some books during that particular time, those last 2 weeks of October, where I was going to ultimately miss I could get their reviews written, but I wasn't going to be able to get my thoughts out there. Now, one particular day, Evander goes to visit Lord Byron, and I don't want to say they kind of get into it, but they are kind of arguing a little bit. And then all of a sudden, Lord Byron kind of starts coughing and choking, and it's almost as though these vines just kind of start growing up and in through his skin, through his throat, and he dies. Well, Evander's like, holy crap, what just happened? Like, something just killed this man. And comes down to the will reading. And so there's Laurie, who is the grandson of Lord Byron, and then there's Evander. And apparently Lord Byron had some relatives, like a sister, and he only leaves like minimal things, but he leaves pretty much everything to Evander. Like, he says, Evander, this is for you. Like, he gives him his estate, he gives him his money, he gives him all of it. Now, Evander's only 17, so he's like, well, my sister is going to have to be your guardian until you come of age, so Aunt Oleander is going to come and like be your guardian. And apparently this particular lady is a nightmare. I really kind of picture her as like the worst possible person, because she comes in just absolutely pretty much dressing them up and down like she owns this place, and brings her children, Bane and Azalea, who are also nightmare of children, but they're like adult children, but they're still terrible, terrible people. So the only person that Evander has to really lean on in any particular way is Lori. And Lori, even though we keep getting these glimpses and flashbacks from Evander's perspective of either Lori with a shovel or Lori trying to cut him in half or something like that, there's something about Lori's demeanor which makes that feel like a false memory. Like for me, whenever I would hear Evander talk about it, because so much about Evander and his memory is very nebulous, that putting it, like making it fit with Lori, just didn't really work for me. I just couldn't understand of like that. I don't know. I need more information. I need something that makes that make sense for me. So ultimately, Evander has to lean a little bit on Lori in order to almost survive this particular Aunt Oleander and her two children, because they have come in here like a whirlwind and decided to uh, almost kind of stake their claim. It doesn't feel like they really want to, it's not like they're trying to steal Evander's money, but it is like Aunt Oleander wants to shape him into a new person, almost like a pet for her, something like that. It was really kind of terrible. But now he's got to lean on Lori, and now even he starts to question whether his memories about this past event are like accurate or not. Because why would, like, if that was 7 years ago, they would have been about 10, and it's like, why would a 10-year-old want to try to kill like another 10-year-old with a shovel? Because Lori, even at this point at 17, does not seem vindictive, does not seem murderous, does not seem as though he is out to get Evander or even really like poison him or anything. Like, he doesn't seem to have anything too much against Evander. So that's when Evander really starts to kind of question, like, what is going on here? Because so much that he thought the way the world worked, which honestly, the way the world worked is all that he knows inside this house pretty much. And it's feeling like he's maybe incorrect about things. So I've really been kind of like dancing on the edges of this story, because I don't know what you guys would consider a spoiler, but I think once I started like really understanding, I was like even more intrigued with what was going on. Yes, there is like this gothic kind of queer love story. There is something drawing Lori and Evander together, even though Evander has this memory of where he feels like Lori was trying to take him out when they were like 10 years old. And so the house having this haunted vibe, having this, like as though it's just slowly being overtaken by these branches and vines that are creeping in along the floors, and mold spores coming in through the carpets, and it's just very, very atmospheric. I enjoyed it immensely, and I will say that it took me just a little bit of time to get into it. I want to say 10 or 15%. I needed to get into it, because I was not sure where we were going until things start to kind of unravel, so to speak. And then I was really hooked. But I do think there were some hints and allusions early in the book that, because I was audiobooking it, so I feel as though there were things that were said that made way more sense once things really started to play out. And so I was more or less hooked on this book because I needed to know what was going to happen next, and if I was right about certain guesses, and if things were going to like play out the way I thought. In a bit, like in a way, I was like, haha. But okay, we're at like 15 minutes now at this particular point. If you don't want to hear me say these few words, this could potentially be spoiler. You don't have to stick around and listen for this part. But spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. I really thought he was a zombie. Not quite. So that was intriguing. But I also kind of have this vibe of Frankenstein's monster. So that's all I'm putting out there with my spoilers, because those were some of the things I would love to have said earlier that I wanted to get more towards the end of this review to kind of put it out there. Now, one particular person, her name is Jamie Folk, and that's Folk. She says that it has an underlying theme of hunger throughout the story. And, I do think there are quite a few references to hunger and being ravished or famished or whatever. I didn't really kind of get the full vibe of the underlying theme of hunger, but I definitely can understand it. And the CG Drews puts a comment on here, so just letting you guys know that if you want a list of content warnings, that you can click on this link on their Goodreads post to go and see what those content warnings are. It's a little bit of a interesting book. It definitely has some Body Snatcher like vibes. I don't know. That was a movie that really freaked me out when I was a kid. I just could not watch the Body Snatchers. It just like, I don't know. There was a point somebody was in a tub and something like falls through the ceiling and it's kind of like a half-baked version of them. I think that traumatized me like a lot. But there were also moments of this where I kept like flashing back to that image and I was like, is this where we're going? I don't know. It says this book, somebody else, Mariki, they said this book is genre bending. It goes from psychological thriller to murder mystery to almost vampire like horror, and then back to psychological again. I just think that's just a really good psychological horror book, in my personal opinion. Like going through all those things, that just for me makes the one genre of like a psychological horror book. But that's just my thoughts. But I'm going to go ahead and leave this here. I'm going to let you guys decide if this is a book for you. I think it is. And even though we're just a little past spooky season, it's a good, kind of cool read. It is a little grotesque at times, so please be aware that content warnings are out there if you need to look at them to see if this is for you. But with all of that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't liked and subscribed already, I hope you will, and I will see you all on the next page. I hope you have a great one.